Reverend Dr. Gary Mason, formerly of the East Belfast Mission, but now working for the Northern Ireland Association for Mental Health, is joining me today here in East Belfast. That's a very brief and inadequate introduction, Gary, because you have done so much over the years that's impacted not only on the local community, but nationally and internationally, and hopefully we're going to be able to talk a bit about that. But in July 2013 on BBC Radio Ulster's Sunday Sequence programme, you described yourself as a recovering sectarian bigot. So what I want you to do to start with is to go back to your childhood and tell us a bit about the experiences that made you the sectarian bigot in the first place.
I mean, my analysis of it, Ruth, I think anyone growing up in this sectarian cockpit of Northern Ireland, you breathe in the area of sectarianism practically from birth. We live in a very segregated community. Even when I was growing up, it still was a pretty Protestant area. And you heard the stories, you heard, don't trust the other side, be careful of the other side. So as a young person, those things shaped you as a person. A couple of years ago, I was speaking at a Sinn Féin Uniting Ireland conversation in the Holy Grail of Republicanism, which is the Rotunda Rooms in Dublin. And my opening address to Sinn Féin, and you know, their senior figures were there, people like Jerry Adams and that in the front row, and I said, let me teach you a little song that my grandfather taught me as a child. I said, it goes like this: sprinkle, splatter, holy brown water, we'll scatter those papishes every one. If that doesn't do, sure, we'll cut them in two, and we'll give them a touch of the orange and blue, which are Protestant colours. I remember saying to the Republicans, I said, I promise you I don't sing that song anymore as a middle-aged man. But what impact that had on me as a 5 or 6 year old, I don't know. But I still remember that song. And I said, and I think you Republicans also need to acknowledge your own sectarian songs. Because I think sometimes within Republicanism there, particularly Ruth, there's been a playing down that this was a kind of sectarian war. The vast majority of people that died in this war were not military actors. So there was a degree of sectarianism within that. And in the early 1990s, for 2 years, I spent in a working party in sectarianism, which was actually co-chaired by Mary McAleese. Mary and I would have been on that committee together. She went on to much greater things than I did. She was President of Ireland and served 2 7-year terms. And we grew up in separate parts of the city, or in the North Belfast area, Ardoyne area. I grew up in sort of southeast Belfast. And we grew up primarily in segregated communities. And that shaped me as a human being. I've often said it wasn't a trendy thing to do as a teenager to date someone from the Catholic community in exactly the same way as a white or black person in the Deep South in the 50s and 60s in the United States. It wasn't a done thing. So we're not the only community that has suffered from segregation.
And in fact, actually, sometimes when Catholics went out with Protestants or Protestants went out with Catholics, there were deaths that resulted because they had done just that, wasn't it?
I remember when my grandfather was buried in a cemetery not too far from where we're sitting. There's the graves of 2 brothers called Orr, and that was sort of early 70s, and they were dating 2 Catholic girls as 2 Protestants, and they were murdered. Now, no one can argue that they were kind of state actors or military actors within loyalism or within the British establishment. It was wrong place, wrong time. And that happened on a number of occasions. I guess, Ruth, in those early days, I suppose, of the 70s and 80s, it's changed somewhat now. But if you fell in love with someone from the other side, invariably England was the safest haven. And I would have known of many couples would have gone to really begin their lives somewhere else. Middle class circles possibly could have gone away with it a bit easier, but working class areas were so heavily segregated in those early days of the Troubles and incredibly violent. It was just too risky.
So was that happening?
Yeah. You know, they used the Northern Ireland phrase, you turned, was the phrase, you know, coming out of the phrase turncoat.